Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Dr. Primrose ZJBima and I post content about research, running and mindfulness. Today's video is a cross-cutting topic discussion, what I wish I knew when I was 12 years old. Oh wow. So for context, that would be 20 years ago for me because I turned 32 this month on the 1st of August. And this topic didn't come up because I'm now 32, actually. It's because I've been watching the Olympics Games over the past 2 weeks, particularly focusing on athletics events because, of course, I'm a runner and I focus a lot on that. And I was just thinking about how I wish I had so much to see when I was younger of women in sport, of women from different country contexts, including African women in their mode of excellence, watching them receive awards, accolades at the highest stages, you know. But I never had that opportunity. And as much as I loved running and whatnot, I think my limited exposure also probably contributed to me not pushing further in some aspects. And that to an extent also applies to many aspects of my life, career wise, as well as in terms of academics. I'm sure academically you're like, but girl, you've always told us that you've dreamt of having a PhD since you were 15 and you got it by the time you were like 28, 29. So what's wrong there? But actually, there's so much more that I wish I had known in life. So please grab a drink, a coffee, tea, whatever it is. But I'm going to be talking to you for a while. And my discussion is going to be based on what I believe was lack of guidance, perhaps not deliberately, from whatever or whoever that I was exposed to. And now that in turn shaped my trajectory career wise and how I progressed academically. I'm also going to speak about what it is that happened in my life that I believe really helped to catapult me to the greater heights that I've reached thus far, to also just accelerate my progress sometimes, but also what happened to actually push me backwards, right? Because I'm definitely not a perfect person. I've struggled in life. I continue to struggle. So I feel that even though I was young and I was a child at the age of 12, there should have been a lot more thinking and there should have been a lot more strategizing that I had to do. So I think I needed to have a clearer idea of where I wanted to be in life. I remember attending entrance interviews for what we call Form 1 in Zimbabwe, which is like an eighth grade. So the first year out of high school. And speaking about how I wanted to be a businesswoman, how I wanted to be in charity, because I was just so excited about helping people because I think I'd seen people who were being helped, being happy and benefiting and having better lives. And I'd also just seen how the gift of helping others was very helpful within society through the lens of what was happening with my family, a church, and in spaces that I visited. So kindness inspired me, right? But even me saying that I wanted to be a businesswoman, I wanted to have orphanages, I wanted to help people on the streets, I didn't quite know how I was going to accumulate that much wealth to do that. I didn't even know the kind of business that I wanted to run. Anyway, fast forward between the years of Form 1 to Form 4, which is the first years of high school that lead up to ordinary level, when I was at the Victoria High School in Zimbabwe, I discovered that I loved writing and that I wanted to nurture my skills in writing, particularly in English. And that's actually what led to me wanting to have a PhD, because I just thought that to have a PhD, you had to be a writer. I thought that I was going to get a PhD in literature because at that time I really wanted to write stories, that have never been told before. I wanted to see more versions of African literature out there because most of the literature that I was exposed to was written by white women, by white people, including men from different contexts that were actually outside my country context and outside my continental context. So I do feel that as I was going through the stages of school, no one really pointed out that I was a good writer, right? I did get the A's for English, for creative writing and whatnot. And I wrote storybooks, which I circulated around the boarding house when I was in the hostel. And people really appreciated my work. However, it did not go beyond that. So there was no outside nurturing or acknowledgement of that particular gift. And so I believe that these were stages of lack of guidance in terms of writing, right? I really appreciate my father because he really held my hand in terms of teaching me how to write and helping me with homework, always getting extra work from the teachers. Hey, it was hectic. From as early as grade 3, guys, I had extra work from teachers and I had passed exam papers. So I think that helped to groom me, right? Because I had a confidence in writing, I had a confidence with engaging with comprehension exercises and whatnot. And so my reading and writing skills were really excellent. My mom used to get me a wide variety of books, but then again, all those books, like I mentioned, lacked that kind of imagery that I was seeking, something that resonated very closely with my life experiences. And so I cultivated this motivation to become a writer. I wanted to write novels. I wanted to be a screenwriter for films and whatnot. However, that was not to be. I grew up during a time when thinking about becoming a film writer, screenwriter, or working in that sector, people sort of like smiled at people who were being doctors, who were becoming nurses, who were becoming lawyers and whatnot. And if you so happen to say you were a creator, people would just be like, you're going to be broke. And they didn't take that seriously. So I think because I was very much aware of those cultural expectations and very much aware that I would not be funded or supported to study towards a degree or a program in film, I had to let that dream go. I went as far as applying for film school, getting a place and paying registration fees, but then that's pretty much what happened and that was it. So fortunately, you can write in many sectors, right? I developed a strong interest in politics, in international relations, in policy making, as well as in gender. Because of my experiences growing up, you become more aware of how unfair the world is. You become more aware of what interests you or what depresses you politically. You become more interested in policy making and how things could be corrected, right? So that's how I ended up studying towards a Bachelor of Social Science, where my majors were public administration, international relations, and gender studies. However, again, I don't think there was any deliberate form of guidance to be like, this girl is going to excel and she's going to be a Creed international relations scholar and a gender studies scholar also. So what I did do though, in line with the advice we often receive going into university, going into school, is to join clubs and societies which resonate with our interests. And when those clubs or societies or platforms did not exist, I created them. So, for example, when I was doing my last 3 years of high school at Machabeng College in Lesotho, I created an international school of Lesotho Model United Nations, ISOMAN, and it really helped because we were required to do 50 hours of something that is creative. I was part of the newspaper society, and I was also part of Fabrics and Rhythmics Poetry Club. I hope they still exist. And then we also had to do 50 hours of something that resonated with service. So I was doing community service by going to orphanages and providing help and support to the young kids there. And then when it came to action, you had to come up with something that was innovative. Sport was an option, but the sports that were traditional, like running, were not going to be counted. So that's when I thought about, you know what? Let's think about politics in action. Let's think about young people thinking about policy making and how to change the world and make it a better place together. So I created that organization and attracted about almost 100 students, right? It was amazing. I don't want to spend so much time on that. And what helped was that by the time that I moved to the University of Cape Town, there was a United Nations Association of South Africa, UNASA, UCT charter. So I just literally joined them. And by the time I was doing my third year of university, I was now the Model United Nations director. So, I already saw the SIDS earlier and it was something that I was amazing at. And we managed to host a Model United Nations for various universities across the country. A 3-day conference was amazing with about 6 panels representing different United Nations organizations. So I managed to craft myself, but I don't think I had mentors or I had sponsors that I could say were patting me on my back and directing me. My parents, of course, were cheerleaders and encouraging me and speaking to me about what I was doing and how I thought it was going to help me with my career. But of course, the limitation is that they're not experts in those particular fields. So I then also, because I was doing gender studies, we were exposed to a young women's leadership project. I do thank the African Gender Institute and the Gender Studies Department at the time, which is now the Department of African Feminist Studies, for actually creating that platform, right? Something that is non-academic, but allows you to think about what you can do with gender studies, what you can do with feminist knowledge in the world. And we teamed up with young people from different parts of the continent. And so there I got to meet more younger people and embraced the idea that I had to put myself out there and I had to network. Although I wish those are things that I had done so much more earlier. So if you've got young children, if you're young, if you're under 18, start looking for opportunities and start thinking about how they speak to your interests. So I think when I speak about lack of guidance, there are about 4 pillars. Number 1 is the parental. Number 2 is the school aspect, the school system. Number 3 is culture. And number 4 is general exposure. So when I think about parental guidance, right? Parents do trust that the school system is going to educate their child, the school system is going to groom them, that they are going to become great in different disciplines and discover their talents, because teachers, of course, are educated. Teachers, of course, even receive educational psychology education, and it is assumed that they will accordingly help to direct children towards a brighter future. I know that you might have different experiences. You might have been catapulted to greater heights by specific teachers and whatnot. That's amazing. In my case, I don't think there was that kind of like deliberate move, mostly because of, I think, my background in terms of the schools that I attended, the capacity they had, and the leeway that teachers actually had in terms of supporting us. And also, let us not forget that teachers also, depending on the exposure they have, they can't give to you what they do not know about or what they do not have first-hand experience of. So I think that my parents should have spoken to us more about the career pathways we wanted to follow from as early as primary school stage, going into high school. You get to Form 1, you get all these subjects, 8 of them, you just study them because you're supposed to go to school and you're supposed to work hard and you're supposed to pass. The parents do give support to ask which subjects are you struggling with, get extra teachers so that you can pass, which is fine. But I don't think I was ever in a position where it was known where this daughter was going and the people were necessarily grooming me in that direction. So these children who were like, I want to be a doctor, and the action was more deliberate. I want to be a lawyer, action was more deliberate. I want to be an accountant, action was more deliberate. And I think in the instance that a child doesn't know what they want to do, they should be deliberate plans of action taken to make them speak to different people or to expose them to people that could be icons and help them. So even though my parents maybe didn't have such conversations with me, I did belong to a family where I saw people thriving because they were in diplomacy or because they were teachers. So it was obvious to me that I could create a career out of teaching. I could have a career that was linked to diplomacy and policy making. But I can't necessarily say that those people were like my icons from a very early stage in life. But later on, I had a point of reference when I was discovering that, oh, I think I can teach, or I can do research, or I want to do international relations. And when it comes to the school system, I don't know how things are right now, but growing up, having been through the Zimbabwean school system, at least between 1998 and 2008, that's from grade 1 to Form 4, where I wrote my O levels, I think that the focus was on people having to pass. And the type of learning we did was, to a large extent, what some may call rote learning. Learning, regurgitating stuff, and then making it, mostly getting A's, maybe B's. And there was this culture that led to me giving up on accounting because I thought that getting a B in accounting was actually a failure. And I still feel that I could have become a chartered accountant, y'all, because I could have just proceeded from my O levels to doing maybe A levels with maths and accounting in it and whatnot. But I remember vividly the moment when I was sitting in the last accounting exam, knowing that I probably got 74 because I had a way to calculate my marks. And I actually came up with a B in accounting. So I told myself, this is the last time I'm doing accounting. And no one ever came to me to say, you know what, with a B, you can do something with the accounting. And oftentimes people say that if you don't get an A in something, then you're better off doing what you got an A in if you actually do have A's. So I think the kind of competitive environment that was around with a lack of guidance in relation to grades and pass marks actually cost me. So I was like, okay, I'm getting A's in English. I love writing anyway. I'm just going to go for it. I'm amazing at history. I love politics. I'm interested in writing and remaking history. So let me just do this. I'm grateful for those A grades, right? But I do think that giving them more weight above a B in accounting should not be something that I did, but I did it. And it was not even something that I did with guidance. My parents were all for choose the subjects you want to do and we will support you. So I didn't go through the A level system. After O levels in Zimbabwe, when I moved to Lesotho, I was exposed to what we call the International Baccalaureate Diploma, IB, which is usually taken by students at international schools because I was then attending an international school. So for background, my primary school was David Livingstone Primary School in Harare, good government school, in an urban setting. And then I went to Victoria High School for boarding for 4 years, which is in Masvingo province, Zimbabwe. Then, of course, I moved to an international school, Machabeng College in Lesotho. So I think that really helped somehow, even though we didn't have deliberate career guidance. What I liked was that at the school, right, we had deliberate education in terms of they would make you write an entrance test, see how you're doing in different subjects. So if maths is not your strongest point, they would put you in a maths group where students struggle a bit more than others. So for example, you are like in maths set 4, but maybe in English set 1, in French set 4, but maybe in biology set 2. You're in business set 1 and IT set 1, and maybe like for a subject like physics, you're in set 4, set 3. So this is typically like a student who's not very strong in the sciences. But that was not to dump students, because the situation that I experienced when I was in Zimbabwe is that they would calculate your overall grades. And if you have a very good average, you just stay on in the first class, which was the case with me, such that when I was in Form 3, I had to fight to leave the first class, which was in 1A1 and 2A1, but I wanted to go to 3A2 because that's where commercial subjects were available. And at that time, I wanted to do accounting and I wanted to do computer sciences. So I could fight to go lower because I was in an A1 class. But the system was such that a student who was in A3 doing arts could not fight to maybe get a chance to go to the sciences in A1 or to the commercials in A2. So it was a very terrible system in hindsight, and I really hope that things have changed. And I know that most countries probably do this. Perhaps it was a capacity issue, right? Because the school that I then went to, where they had sets for different subjects, where you choose the subject you want and you're afforded the opportunity to study it in a set that suits your capacity or capabilities. I saw that there was still no training that leaned towards professions that were specific. And I met a lot of students, right, who wanted to be doctors. I didn't meet people who wanted to be lawyers. Like, a lot of students were so science oriented, but that's because the government in Lesotho sponsored a lot of science students. So even if people were not strong at sciences, they were fighting so hard to make it in the science subject so that they could at least get an opportunity to get to varsity. In my case, my parents were going to pay my fees, so there was a bit of some flexibility in terms of what I would want to study, with the exception of film, of course. So it was a better setting, school setting, and I feel that studying there sort of like started opening up for me in terms of what I knew. So I've mentioned parental guidance, I've mentioned the school system. Now let's go to culture. culture is linked to parental guidance and it's also linked to school systems, right? But when I speak about culture, when I was in Zim, I was very local minded. I grew up thinking that as a young girl, you grow up, you go to school, pass, go to the University of Zimbabwe, get a job, get married, and reproduce, and the system recycles itself. So upon leaving my country, I came to realize that there were people that were ignorant of the reality that there are many more countries in the world. And people asked me questions that I thought were very strange, like, in Zimbabwe, do people have this? Do people have that? And I was like, I want to create global awareness. So even though I created that model United Nations society I was speaking to you about, it was also motivated by the reality that I saw that a lot of people didn't know much and I wanted to promote global awareness. And the UN I thought was an entry point because people are always fascinated about the work of the UN, although they don't end up being extremely fascinated about what happens in different countries. So I wanted students to have a platform where they have a model United Nations setting, discuss issues affecting different countries, step into the roles of diplomats from those different countries. And of course, that means that you are more globally aware, in addition to discussing global challenges. So when I left Zimbabwe for Lesotho, I obviously gained more than just the local knowledge that I had. I didn't know that South Africa as a country had the best universities on the continent. I didn't know that there was something called best universities because growing up in Zimbabwe, the idea was that we are the best country in the world. We have the best education system. We are amazing and that's it, period. However, I then started, of course, applying to universities. So there was no plan to go back to Zimbabwe. It was either South Africa, the UK, amongst other countries, because I could dream better because I gained more knowledge, right? And I feel that that culture of being in an international school also helped because people who come from different countries have knowledge about different things that you can do after university, different universities you can go to, different study programs and whatnot. Whereas had I been in Zim, I would have been either just pursue literature. If I had gotten an A in accounting, I would have just gone for accounting. And in as much as I loved writing, I think I would have probably ended up being a journalist because they usually say if you do the arts at A level and you're very good at writing, go to journalism school. And I know that I don't want to be a journalist. So yeah. So in addition to parental guidance, school systems, and the culture of being in different places, I think exposure for me in terms of some basic aspects to you, which may not have been basic to me. I didn't have access to DSTV, provided by MultiChoice, I think, until I was in Lesotho at the age of 18 or 19, 18. So it was through TV that I started seeing more, through documentaries, through different educational programs. So I do urge people that if you can expose your children to just more than one source of information, one television channel, a national channel especially, try and be deliberate about what they get exposed to. I also got exposed to more through different forms of media because I now had access to the internet, which I had previously not had before the age of 17. And the internet is full of these information sites, information from different universities, and also information about what you can do with different subjects. So my curiosity was then nurtured by my exposure to TV channels that were helpful, my exposure also to new role models through the TV, through the internet. Of course, we all know that the TV and the internet can have their downsides. That's why I say parents also should be deliberate and be part of that journey of making sure that whatever forms of media their children are exposed to are educational and can give them some form of direction. And then also people, right? The people you know. You might be just exposed to people that are mostly teachers, like the family I came from, right? Most of the women that I knew who worked were either teachers or people that were hustling, for example, cross-border trade, and my mother was a nurse. And I also knew of people that were migrating to the United Kingdom to do care work and to do nursing. I did have some aunts, for example, one who was a lawyer and one who had studied politics and was working in global governance. So those were a bit helpful, but they were not close to me because they had gone away because of their opportunities. So I was curious about, okay, what made law lead this person overseas? What made politics lead this person overseas? And because at the time we didn't have WhatsApp, calling was expensive and whatnot, I could not continue to nurture my relationship with those aunts. And so that gap in communication meant that we couldn't communicate better. However, now we have those platforms. WhatsApp is available to most of us. Communication is a bit easier. Even using emails is now more popular. So I do engage with them about careers and just growing as an individual and as a woman. Okay, before I digress. So I speak about people, right? You meet different people in different spaces. And spaces could be church. Spaces could be where your school takes you. Spaces could be conferences. Spaces could be workshops. Now, if you never go to spaces where your curiosity can be nurtured and where you can hear about what other people are doing, you're not going to have the inspiration. For example, I came to know that people could study outside Zimbabwe because a cousin of mine had a send-off party when he was going to university in Australia. And that was just like literally one instance. And I then thought, oh, it's for people with money. I didn't know that some people could go on scholarships. I think I started knowing about the word scholarships when I was probably like 17 years old. And I had never been taught to work so hard to try and get a scholarship. So it was only in varsity where I worked hard to get scholarships, scholarship for honors, scholarship for masters, which I didn't get. But yeah, sorry for another day, but I could apply. And then I got a scholarship for PhD, of course. So if your church system doesn't have programs for the youth and youth development, you ain't gonna get any information. That was my situation. Never had that. Never had career talk. Never had chats about sponsorship and scholarships. It was just, do what the Bible says, respect your parents, respect your teachers at school, and be a good child. Pass, God will bless you, and keep praying for the best. And I think I've been to churches where I see that there's deliberate grooming of humans for the world, in terms of thinking about what else they can do and having classes that are so structured. Those churches, to a large extent, are usually bougie, not very traditional. But I feel like all types of churches just need to catch up and help the youth, help the young people. Also, when I speak about people, if you're a parent, make sure that you're exposing your children to different types of role models and people who are excelling in different industries. If you're fortunate enough to be in a workspace where you can go with your child, if you're running a business which your child can do, also do that. I've done videos where I've spoken about if I were in a family that was running some kind of business, I would study something linked to that because, of course, the capital is already there in terms of, the basic assets. And why not? For example, if my father had a law firm or in accounting or was working in accounting, or if we had a farm, I'll just study accordingly. So I think also just try to expose your children to different people. It could be a relative who has a farm. It could be a relative who's working in a law firm. It could be a relative who works in a hospital and whatnot. In the unfortunate instance that you don't have those close people, just take your children to spaces, right? Make them read about it. But just try and sow seeds of curiosity, seeds of interest, and seeds of awareness of diversity. And that should be helpful. So as we come towards the end of this video, there's something that I just thought about in terms of, so what am I going to do now that I'm not 12 and I know these things, right? Of course, when I become a parent, I'll try and correct, hopefully not over direct my kids and let them be kids and let them be curious in their own way. But I will give guidance and try and expose them to different systems through the schools that they go to, through the people we interact with, through workshops, through events and whatnot. I mean, these things can be done. I saw last year kids going to like a Peppa Pig conference with their parents, and I was like, what? And so I was like thinking, similarly, we could literally have boot camps for kids who are doing coding. We can have career days that are like, have a career fair that looks like a fun fair and all of these things. Yes, countries have trade fairs, but we could go like way beyond that. There's so much more that can be done. So I'm thinking that what is needed for a child that's growing up today? Ooh, look at me without a child giving you parental advice. Number one, training children to be open-minded because things do change. I grew up at a time where the people who were the generation of my parents benefited from going to school, applying for jobs and getting them. But that hasn't been the case for most children who were born during my time, particularly from Zimbabwe. So we needed to have been groomed to know that we can be flexible, we can run businesses, and to know that we belong to a global village, because sometimes if opportunities do not exist where you were born, you can go elsewhere. I'm also saying this applies to studying. Growing up in a Zimbabwe that was quite rigid with major emphasis on A's and to some extent B's, it meant that some people never studied what they wanted to study because of the certain points they didn't get. But I just came to realize later in life that in a lot of countries abroad, and in South Africa, for example, you need to have 2 A-level passes to go to university. But in Zimbabwe, if you need to have 3, some people write 4 A-levels, some write 5, and they get like great points for all of them. And so the competition is just tighter and the places are already few. And outside Zimbabwe, there are universities which probably have better facilities, particularly in science, technology, engineering, and whatnot, amongst others. And I also think that it's important to, in this open-mindedness, to know that in life you can always pivot. The idea that you grow up and you should be one thing, right? Okay, you're going to become a doctor. What kind of doctor? Oh, cardiologist, full stop. They can end up becoming an academic. They can end up working in a research institute. They can end up being an inventor, right? The idea that science, technology, maths are important, I cannot overstate that. I feel that we need to get rid of the idea that maths is so terrible, it's just so difficult, we cannot do it. Of course, I'm not an educational psychologist. I don't know anything about capabilities, but if anything, push hard, do well in math, and finish it in high school. And if it means spending more time on it because you can spend less time on other subjects because you're better there, please do it. Expose your teenage students or children and younger ones to different forms of technology that will help them in terms of how they can fare better in the world. And they should then study skills that help them to be tech savvy in any industry that they go for, whether it's, for example, they are doing work in academia, whether they are doing work with like their hands, but they could learn to use machinery and whatnot. So just think about ways of adding technology to any skills. It could be in agriculture, it could be in mining and whatnot. So I'm also speaking to governments here. A lot of investments need to be done. I also think that we should always think about how new economies are opening up and how to deal with that. In the time of our parents, they could work one job, be pensioned, and sometimes in some countries, we know what the pensions look like. They're not even helpful. But to think about how you need to create a lifestyle and a career pathway that enables you to self-save and invest in your future in different ways. There's a lot of content now about different portfolios or streams of income and whatnot. I think those should even be cultivated from an early stage. There's so many ways that we can do this. Of course, parenting styles are different and people are in different contexts with different resources. But I hope that what I said in this video will be helpful to at least 1, 2, or more families. I've spoken a lot today. That's all I have for what I wish I knew at 12, coming from a 32-year-old, a freshly minted 32-year-old, Dr. Primrose ZJB. Please remember to subscribe if you've not done so yet. Thank you so much for watching. Brace yourself for more content coming to your screens every Sunday without fail, unless, of course, if you've been advised beforehand. Take care and keep well. It's goodbye for now.